Welcome to Orchestrate All the Things. I'm George Anatiotis and we'll be connecting the dots together. Stories about technology, data, AI, and media and how they flow into each other, shaping our lives.
What if the chaos around us isn't collapse but transformation? Michel Bauwens has spent decades mapping the edges of change, from peer-to-peer networks to the commons, from medieval guilds to distributed autonomous organizations. He's been tracking something most people miss, the seeds of a new civilization already growing underneath the noise. In this conversation, we explore how the internet didn't just connect computers, but created an entirely new plane of human organization. One where people coordinate across the planet without hierarchies, without intermediaries, without anyone giving orders. They call it cosmolocalism. What is heavy stays local. What can be shared travels everywhere. But this isn't just theory, it's a lens, a way of reading history that tells you exactly where you are and what's worth building right now. Are you post-seasonal, clinging to a logic whose time has passed? Seasonal, playing the current moment well? Or pre-seasonal, working on the seeds that will matter when the time is ripe? The caterpillar, Michel reminds us, already carries the DNA of the butterfly. This is connected thinking. Join us.
I hope you will enjoy this. If you like my work on Orchestrate All the Things, you can subscribe to my podcast, available on all major platforms, my self-published newsletter, also syndicated on Substack, HackerNoon, Medium, and DZone, or follow Orchestrate All the Things on your social media of choice.
Right, and that's what I call cosmolocalism, where what is heavy, what is physical, is local, but what can be globalized and shared, or at a higher level than just a local, that would be the cosmic level. And so the hyperlocal level, the bioregion level, complementarity in a certain ecoregion or bioregion. And then the cosmic level is all the people doing the same in the whole world are coordinating with each other, learning from each other, creating shared resources, maybe using joint capital. And this creates, lots of new models for doing things. All right, so I'm from Belgium. I have quite a rich professional life in working for telco, working for British Petroleum, working for United States Information Agency, creating 2 startups, making a movie called Technocalypse. But then in 2003, I quit, the business world, took a sabbatical to study social change. And based on my findings, I created the Peer-to-Peer Foundation. That was in 2005. And it's also the place where, for some people find that important, where Satoshi published his white paper. And so then, I've basically been doing this kind of advocacy and research work around peer-to-peer. We can talk about what that means later.
Mm-hmm.
And also around the concept of the commons, shared resources maintained by a community with its own regulation. And then in 2020, COVID struck. I had some difficulties around that time, and I decided to study civilizational history. So basically doing again what I did in 2003, but in much more depth and actually, forever. So it wasn't just 2 years. I'm basically doing that all the time. So I've read all the macro historians. And so I'm trying to place, technology, AI, social change, the climate crisis, the resource crisis, in this kind of really broad framework of human evolution, even more than human evolution, like matter, life, and humanity. And so this is, I guess, where we are. So I'm somewhat known for my work. I have a Substack called Fourth Civilization, where I really, discuss the transition that we are in. What's happening, what should we be doing, what can we expect, those kinds of questions. And so, I guess my strength is I have a foot in humanities, I have a foot in business experience, I have a foot in technology. So kind
Okay,
of
that's
trying to be integral, integrative.
that's a lot of fit actually, and a lot of topics that you touch upon. And actually, I think it's a good time for me to mention the occasion, let's say, for having this conversation, and a little bit of background, injecting into that my sort of personal history and how I came to know first your work and then you. So for me, it was about a couple of decades back, because it was at the time I was also doing research, and that's how I first came to know your work. And my research was on the intersection of distributed systems and knowledge representation and reasoning. And I was interested in transitioning this particular area of research to a paradigm that would enable decentralization, but decentralization not just of compute and storage, but also of knowledge and interaction and decision making. So that pretty much describes the broad paradigm of what's called peer-to-peer, and that's how I came to know your work. And I was wondering if you would like to expand a little bit on that and summarize how you arrived at this concept of peer-to-peer and your work with the Peer-to-Peer Foundation.
Yes. So first about peer-to-peer itself. So most people, especially in the tech world, would think about the technological infrastructure.
Yeah.
But my point is that if you allow computers to talk to each other without centralized servers, you also allow people to talk to each other without centralized intermediaries. And so that creates a new capacity in the world for translocal self-organizing. So basically what we are doing here, I can see you, you can see me, we talk in real time, we can organize, we can work together, we could manage a business if we wanted to, an NGO. And so that capacity to freely align with other people around similar aims, that is something that actually did not exist. We could communicate fast, but not in real time, being in different places and still organized together. So that's what I mean with peer-to-peer. It's the capacity for translocal self-organizing of peers who have to act as equals over digital networks. And so what does that necessitate in terms of governance, property formats? So we entered themes like open source, free software, open design, crypto. All these things are expressions in one way or another of that dynamic. And maybe also tell you that, so I see social change in terms of seed forms. So when a system saturates and start disintegrating, the what you have to look at is the people who are leaving the system in crisis. What are they doing? What are they reinventing? And so they create seeds that will first exist on their own, and a new way of doing accounting, a new way of farming, and a new energy, but also very important, new mentalities, new ways of working together, new ways of organizing. And so people do that separately, focused on their own innovations. But over time, this creates subsystems, and over time, these subsystems find each other and may create actually a new logic. So for me, peer-to-peer and the commons together are essential aspects of the new logic. So if you look at it over the long term, tribal societies use mostly gift economies and commoning. Civilizations, complex class societies, use market pricing and state command, hierarchy. And I think we are now basically able to coordinate massive amounts of human work and capital through mutual signaling in open digital ecosystems. And AI for me is like uh, this, but without people. So you have something called stigmergy, which is our capacity to coordinate work through mutual signals.
Through
Like
protocols.
what to do in Wikipedia because you know what's missing or what's wrong. Same with free software. And so AI is actually kind of like creating a layer where our digital representations can actually do that without our direct intervention. So it's kind of like on steroids, and that creates all kinds of problems. But okay, we can discuss this.
Yeah, indeed. There's a lot of topics to touch upon and actually to define for people who may not be familiar with them, or in fact redefine. And I'm saying that because I'm thinking in particular about the commons, which was anyway the next thing I was going to ask you about, but you already mentioned that when you started talking about peer-to-peer. So I think for many people, when they hear about the commons, the first thing they would think of is, this widely circulated story about the tragedy of the commons and so on. And I know that you, and actually people even before you, have sort of debunked that story already. But I'm just mentioning it as a reference point so you can tell us a little bit about the commons and what's the thread that connects the peer-to-peer aspect to the commons.
Yeah, commons is best understood in comparison. So either private property, it's mine and you cannot use it without my permission or without paying me, or it's a collective resource run by the state, where basically the state determines how you can use it, not you and not your community. But then in between, you have this kind of collective resource that is from a community. And historically, that used to be physical, like a forest or a grazing ground or agreements for fishing, or like the mountain flanks in Switzerland. Why are they so green? Because the villagers manage their own mountain flanks and want to keep it for the next generations. So usually, scholars and advocates distinguish three elements of the commons. One, it's a resource. So there's something there. Can be immaterial, so it can be, I don't know, like managing a language together, could be, or poetry festival maybe. But originally it was also like so fisheries, forests. Okay, so it's a resource. There's a thingy there. I think it's important because otherwise it gets disembodied with some people. The second, it's maintained, defended, created by a group of people, community, a village, a group of stakeholders. And the third, according to their own rules and regulations. So that distinguishes it from state property. Right? It's the village manages its pasture. It's not like in the Soviet Union, a state-owned kolkhoz. No, it has to. So commons has to be communal in some fundamental way. So those three things together, and then you could say there's like a history of commons. So first, physical, as the industrial societies, because they believe in private property and not in common property, start enclosing, basically, putting fences and privatizing the land. So then the farmers are chased away to the cities, and they create social commons. So instead of mutualizing the land that they don't have access to anymore, they mutualize their life risk. So that's what gave us in the 19th century, the unions, the co-ops, the fraternities, the housing co-ops, basically all the things that would become the social welfare state, which is a stratification, a taking over by the state of these social commons of the working class. And then the big thing, and that's how it's related with peer-to-peer, is once we invent these digital ecosystems where we can share knowledge, then there is a massive return of the commons digitally. So people discovered that they can, learn together, teach each other, keep encyclopedias for the whole community, create collaborative protocols. So they in order to work together online, you need commons. And so you create kind of a new logic because, when you have a well-functioning digital commons like free software, like Linux, for example, which is used for all the big computers in the world, then that creates an economy. But from this moment on, these companies are actually dependent on their joint commons. So there's a new dynamic where you have kind of a contributive logic around the commons, where the commons depend on people contributing to it, and creating that common value. And then people create added value for the market, but they are also dependent on the success of their corporation. So this is, would be the digital stage, where peer-to-peer is linked to the commons. And I argue that we are reaching another stage, which is like phygital, which is the synthesis of the digital and the physical, where you can now have a co-op, a housing co-op, but you use digital commons to manage it. You can do permaculture in a shared urban garden, but you use digital commons to manage it on a planetary scale and work with all the other people on the planet doing the same thing, right? And that's what I call cosmolocalism, where what is heavy, what is physical, is local, but what can be globalized and shared, or at a higher level than just a local, that would be the cosmic level. And so the hyperlocal level, the bioregion level, complementarity in a certain ecoregion or bioregion. And then the cosmic level is all the people doing the same in the whole world are coordinating with each other, learning from each other, creating shared resources, maybe using joint capital. And this creates, lots of new models for doing things.
Okay, so I think a fair question to address in lieu of this cosmolocal synthesis would be why? So what's the need? I mean, it's pretty obvious how people would coordinate around a common resource on the local level, and it's also, I think, by now well understood how people coordinate around digital resources globally through open source projects and so on. But how does this synthesis that you talk about works exactly, and what's the need for that, in fact?
Well, it's basically, first of all, a learning device. You just learn. You have to imagine in a network, an open ecosystem, any innovation anywhere is available to the whole network. So let's say you have, a particular type of farmer that works in a mountainous region. And you would have that in the Andes, you'd have that in the Tibetan, Tibetan and Burmese highlands. And they encounter a lot of the same problems. So maybe if they connect, if they find a new machine that works, in these mountainous areas, so now suddenly those two parts of the world know it instantly. But even as a company, if you have, let's say you're a small biotech company, if you're competing with big companies who have 5,000 researchers, there might be actually a competitive advantage in creating a coalition of smaller ones, and you create your research commons for all the companies participating in that research, right? So it's a competitive advantage. It creates more speedy learning, more innovation, creates scale.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this part that you talked about now refers basically to the knowledge exchange and knowledge management aspect. Is the governance aspect also relevant in the cosmolocal paradigm?
Yeah, because you have to invent new ways, and we can see how that changes because, um, like you see, there's a reinvention of hierarchy. So it's not totally flat. But what you see, for example, typically in open source communities would be what they call maintainers.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody can contribute as long as you have a certain skill level. And sometimes there's solutions to determine like who has the skill level. But once you're in, you can do basically you're free to choose your work, which you can do in a normal company. But you can say, I want to work on solving this particular problem. Nobody can say no. So then you develop this piece of software, and there will be somebody who can refuse it or not. So most of these maintainers, they defend the integrity of the ecosystem. So they don't tell anybody what to do, but they make sure that the new software has high quality. And same with Wikipedia, you have editors that because there are fights, political fights, so they have to maintain the peace and this. So this is a new type of hierarchy that we didn't know, where they just defend the ecosystem but they don't command, right? This is an example. And then of course new license types. So again, if you do software, and I work out of my free will because I'm motivated, if somebody just takes it and privatizes it, I'm not going to be happy. I'm going to stop doing it. I will feel like a sucker, basically, right? So that's why we have free software licenses and open source licenses that say, if you collaborate on this commons, this digital commons, everything you do is for the whole community and cannot be privatized. And you can only use it if you use the same rules. So you can actually copy the software and put it in another context, as long as that context also allows the same rules to be applied. So there's all kinds of things that become necessary just because it's a new logic of working together. Like you're not giving me orders, I'm not giving you orders. You're not paying me, I'm not paying you. We're working together because we found we had an affinity together and we want to do a project together. And that's happened a billion times every day on the internet nowadays, right? Which is very different from waiting for somebody to hire me who will then tell me what to do. So it's, in my view, a true value revolution from a commodity regime where you produce scarce goods that you sell at a price, to these open systems where you contribute, and when there's still a market, but the market is derivative from the contributory value.
Still, I mean, you could argue that there are maybe some historical precedents to at least some of the things that you talked about. So, for example, in the previous times, you had guilds of craftsmen that would come together and work in a collaborative and what would seem like a peer-to-peer.
It's a question of scale. So peer-to-peer was local, and now it's translocal. It's both like a bigger scale, like planetary scale, and sometimes I argue it's different because it's not just big geography, it's actually another plane. Some people call it the noosphere, the sphere of shared knowledge. It's like it has its own geography, so it's not just bigger physically, it's also somewhere else at the same time. And so if you believe like me that civilization is actually geography, it's the relation between the countryside and the farming with the city and getting a surplus from one to the other, then it's not trivial that we now have a new sphere, which is not directly physical.
Yeah, actually, if you look at it, the difference from previous forms of, let's say, self-organization, such as the guilds, would be that guilds would be craftsmen that would be also translocal in the sense of moving regions, but they were always collocated, where now you have these sort of peer-to-peer organizations in which people can be scattered around the world.
Nomads, and they can have, people are like completely in different places. So to give like an historical image, I actually believe that the religious communities were prefigurative because the Pope, he's not the head of a physical nation state, although there is like a little piece of land, and it was bigger in the Middle Ages, but he was the leader of all Christian believers, all Catholics. Similarly, the Sultan was the leader of all Islamic belief, of all Muslims, right? Wherever they lived. So this is already like a prefiguration of, except it's now not by kinship, not by religious belief, it's by affinity and joint projects. So I call it a object-oriented sociality. And the object is not physical necessarily, it can be so what unites people in these digital commons is joint goals and joint aims, and then they organize around this common production to achieve those aims.
Okay, I like it because we've already from for a while, in fact, started getting into historical precedents
Yeah.
and the territory of looking at his civilizational patterns. And I know this is something that you have been doing. You also mentioned in the introduction, actually, for the last, I think, like 4 or 5 years, give or take. So, what brought you there? So, why, how, what was it that led you to start investigating these macro historical
Yeah. Well,
patterns?
we
And
can thank COVID in part. Okay, so I remind the people who are listening that I started 2 years, 2002, 2003. And of course, I continued. So I studied open source communities, free software. Then I studied urban commons for a few years. I advised cities, mayors, governors, and I went to the Vatican twice. Worked for the mayor of Seoul in South Korea. So I was applying this to kind of politics and policy. And then came to COVID, and I'm someone who needs quite a bit of stimulation, and I really thought this is the occasion. Like, I'm kind of stuck here. I can't travel. I can't go to where people invite me. So let's redo it. Let's redo the sabbatical. But actually, it's become like a lifelong project now. So I'm actually systematically reading since 2020 all the macro historians. There's three different schools since the 20th century. So I'm doing them quite systematically. And each macro historian brings something to the table. And we can maybe take one of something as an example. So then the other thing is, they all identify patterns, right? So I'm actually building a pattern library, but also cycles. So I did also an independent study of cycles. So what cycles are people talking about? What's the evidence for these cycles? How do they fit with one another? Which is not an easy thing, because they all have different temporalities and so yeah. So over time, so starting in 2020, we're now in 26. I accumulated a lot more understanding than I had 5 years ago, but it's just an ongoing process. I'm not stopping. It's almost like food now for me. I just need it. I don't open my computer before 1 p.m. And I do spend at least 2 hours every morning, reading and taking notes, and then reflecting on what I learn, and then I write about it, to structure my ideas.
Mhm.
I'm writing a book online, but also I have a Substack. I maintain an encyclopedia, which also kind of really helps to, you know, fixate ideas and see how they related. And so that's what I kind of bring to the table. So first of all, like, how do civilization evolve? What do we know? There's quite a lot that we know nowadays about this. How did transition happen? Are there any rules in transitions, like certain dynamics that happen specifically when one form of civilization change into another? And then especially, the role of technology, how that changes modes of production, modes of exchange, modes of coordination. And so I'm kind of typically an integrative thinker. I just can't help it. I'm always interested in how things relate to each other, right? So, if you would be a Marxist, you'd be a historical materialist, looking at physical, geographic mode of production. If you're a cultural historian, you'd be more like a historical idealist, like how ideas evolve and how ideas can actually have a huge influence on the world. Think about Marxism or Islam, like they completely changed the world. They're just ideas, you know. Um, but I like to have both. I like to see, how does matter influence ideas, but also how do ideas influence the material world. And I try to kind of keep that, in some kind of holistic or integrative way. And so I kind of end up with three levels. The basic level is material reality, level of technology, geography, climate, world powers, armies. Second, how do humans organize to survive and thrive in a particular level of materiality. Let's say, hunter gathering, agriculture and mining, industrial, cognitive, simplifying a bit, but broadly.
Mhm.
That's, there's not the same society, but also the ideas you come up with depend on your level of consciousness. You have shame-based societies, guilt-based societies, conquering societies, societies that isolate themselves for several centuries. So yeah, what, what's
I
the
would call
frame?
them. I would call them actually the values that drive
Yeah, exactly.
your
Yeah. So,
behavior.
so I can give you maybe a good example. So the Roman Empire is a slave-based society. You conquer and then you get slaves and gold. At some point, it stops functioning because
You
it's
run
too
out of
big,
places to conquer, basically.
right? Exactly. And so then it starts, shrinking. So you have a peak, and then you have phase B, which is the shrinking phase of civilization. And so then you see Christianity coming up, and Christianity is a real value revolution, right? A slaveholder believes work is for slaves. A citizen doesn't work; he has to, dedicate his life to philosophy and to the city. He's a citizen. Um, and also, for example, what that means is that the body has not really a lot of value, because that's what slaves used to work. But your mind, what a free citizen uses to think, that's like the value. So you get, Platonicism and stuff like that, right? But the Christians say, ora et labora, work and pray, matter and spirit are of equal importance. And so now work becomes something you do to help God in his divine plan to make a better world. So it's not comparable. So it's not like you're evolving from one system to another. It's a bifurcation.
Mhm.
And those people react to what didn't work in the old system, and they don't want anything to do with the old system, and they kind of go in completely different direction. And Buddhism was the same, and maybe Taoism or Confucianism were similar reactions too. Is where or non-dual Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta in Hinduism, right? So you have these religions, and if you look closely, they correspond to certain forms of civilization. That they become hegemonic at some point, and they become the official ideology of an empire. Um, so yeah, I find it fascinating, and of course, we're in the middle of it. This is the thing: we are in the middle of a similar, very deep transformation of our society.
I think more and more people are realizing this, that it's like the in-between period when there is a transition. Nobody
Time of
knows
monsters, Gramsci said,
exactly.
right? The old isn't died yet, but the new isn't there yet.
Yeah.
And so he says that's the time of monsters. And but if you are focused like me on seed forms, you see things like DAOs, distributed autonomous organizations. You see, universal currencies that don't depend on the state and the market. You see, universal accounting system being invented. So these seed forms for me are kind of like a potential prefiguration of the future. Of course, we can't be 100% sure,
Of course. Yeah.
because it's an open future. But I actually do claim that if you study the seed forms, you can, within reason, actually say quite a few things about where we're going. So I'm not a postmodernist in that sense, who thinks, big narratives are futile. There's nothing you can know. Anything can happen. No, 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 not anything. There are structures that, and the more you know what determines you, the more you can be free. If you don't know what is determining your life and your choices, you may think you're free, but you're actually, you know, a ping pong ball of these deeper forces.
Mhm. So one of the things that you mentioned and also becomes quite evident just connecting the different things that we talked about is precisely this, the connections between all these different aspects, like the technological aspect, the value aspect, the civilizational aspect, and so on. And this is, in fact, what, in my mind, I call connected thinking. And this is also the title that we've given to this event that we are co-organizing. And I'm going to just say a few things about this event. It's the first time we do it. We've been talking
Yeah,
about
it's
collaborating for, I don't
walking
know,
seminar. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, the last 4 or 5 years or something. But now this time it looks like it's actually happening. So it's a unique format of an event. It's on site. It's also an example of cosmolocalism in action, because it's bringing a group together from any part of the world to talk precisely about these topics. So civilizational transitions and the different aspects that play into that, and pretty much in summary everything you've talked about so far. So, just playing the devil's advocate here, because it's my job as the host of the conversation. So this all sounds, extremely interesting in theory, and I'm sure lots of people are hooked already just listening to the conversation. So the question that would come to those people's minds would be like, okay, so you're talking about, going deeper into all of these topics, and you're saying like it's going to be an on-site event, so it's going to happen in Greece, by the way, at Lake Kaiafas, which is an off the beaten path, beautiful area with, a lake by the sea, by the mountains, close to ancient sites of historical significance. An
I want to
important
go.
part
I want to come.
An important part is that we're going to revive the peripatetic tradition, actually. So there's going to be lectures, where it's going to be dialogue. It's going to happen walking around on these beautiful sites. So yes, it sounds intriguing. I would also love to join that. Then the question, in practical terms, would think like, okay, it sounds fascinating, but it's also asking a lot. You're telling me I have to, come from wherever and join you, commit to join you for a week. What am I going to get out of that? That's
Well, you know, uh, very practically is I'm not sure, but I'll give you my explanation. So we just had a festival here in Chiang Mai where I live. It was called Mamotopia. It's about AI, and I gave pretty much like a similar series of talks that I plan to do. And when I say talk, it's also conversation.
Mhm.
I'm always organizing in such a way that people can ask deep questions. Uh, and okay, maybe it's good for my ego to say this, but I was very happy to hear it. So this is a guy who told me, you know, I've been a year in Oxford and I've learned more in an hour here than in that year in Oxford. Because I'm free. I'm a free thinker, and especially today, um, you know, s- speech is policed in social media, in the media. It's filtered. In the university, there's so many things you can't say. So just to be between free people who can explore deeply their what they know and share with each other, that opens up like levels of meaning that you have no idea. And having a happy life, in my view, is like meaning. It has to be meaningful. If you're depressed, this is my theory, is because your narrative is not functioning. You don't have a narrative where you have a place where you can be happy. And a success of psychotherapy is often transforming your narrative, transforming the mantras in your head. So that's, I think, one aspect. The other aspect is I'll use an analogy. So I was visiting a city in France, Limoges, and there was a local guide. It was like a working class club called Gramsci Circle, and he showed me a house, And he said, well, 20 years ago, there was this and that and that and that and that. But then he said, and before that, there was another place and it was that. And then he gave me that history. And, I must have been in my 30s or something. And I just realized at that very moment, this is culture. I'm seeing a heap of stones. I can say it's beautiful, it's not beautiful, I like it, I don't like it, that's it. I go on. And this guy gave me like a whole tapestry of added meaning when I looked at that building, right? So now, okay, that's a physical thing, but that's space, if you like. But I do that with time. I give you patterns with time, in time. And the more you can go to the past, the more you can go to the future. And it's not like you don't apply them mechanically. It's not because this happened at the end of Roman civilization doesn't mean this will happen automatically today. That's not at all what I'm saying. But if you recognize that demographic implosion, literacy implosion, and real estate speculation were like three main characteristics of most civilizational collapses, I think that gives you something. That tells you when you are. And then you can also start thinking, does my life make sense? Am I post seasonal? Like I'm nostalgic for time that is no longer there, and I'm doing things that were made sense 50 years ago. When I was 20 in 68, I was 10. So that would be, oh, let's organize the working class and make a new communist party. Well, I don't think that will work because you're post seasonal. You're applying logics that are no longer there. I can be seasonal, and okay, I'm not endorsing anybody here, but think about Trump, how successful he was in winning 2 elections. He's extremely seasonal, right? He just knows what to do. I don't think he's solving anything, in the long term, but like he knows how to play.
Yeah.
So that's seasonal, but you can also be pre-seasonal, which is I want to work now on the seed forms to make sure they're ready when the time is ripe for these seed forms to, how do you say that word in English? When a flower
To bloom, to blossom.
to bloom, right? To blossom. So I want to work, and why is this psychologically, for example, so enriching is because if you live at the end stage of a civilization or society, everything is going down. Like it's very hard for your spirit to mobilize energy when, like, for the last 10, 15 years of your life, things have gone south. But if you look at seed forms and you see them sprout and you see them grow, and your eyes are trained to see many of them, you actually see not one, but like a whole field, let 100 flowers bloom. Then, like, you're different. You're psychologically like full of energy because, like, you're part of this thing that is growing, right? So what do people say about this? It's like the caterpillar actually has the DNA of the butterfly. So if it only sees as a caterpillar, it will decompose. Not a good prospect. But if it knows that is the butterfly in becoming, then she can be happy. Like, I'm gonna be this beautiful being that will fly with these colors, right? So that's a bit kind of the effect that I'm hope to stimulate. And to be honest, I know it works because I've hundreds of people told me that the kind of way I talk and I teach that really changed their lives. It's not about my person. I'm just like a vehicle, and I just happen to have a few skills that fit that particular role. Anyway, so that's, and then of course I could talk about you, George, because so I'm not a technical person. I've been in the tech world for many years, so I kind of have pretty good understanding of many things, but I'm not a techie. And so I'm very happy to work with you because you know the tools, you know how they work, you know why they are there. I think the combination of
Will
my deep
will
story and your practical knowledge, but also your embeddedness in the physical geography, right?
Actually, I wanted to get to that part. So, but
Yeah.
but before that, I would summarize what you talked about in 4 points. So, what people are going to get by injecting themselves into this opportunity? First, pattern recognition skills. So everything we talked about. So how everything connects. Second, strategic clarity. So when you start connecting things and you start realizing how things work, you stop feeling anxiety and you start seeing how things work, basically. The deep
You
historical
see
context.
opportunities. You see opportunities. You see
Yeah,
interstitial opportunities.
yeah.
Yeah.
And what follows from that is the sense of agency. You feel like you can actually control to the extent that you can, at least, your own destiny, let's say. So these are actually very practical benefits that emerge out of this combined theory. And then yes, also to come to your point about the actual, I call it situational awareness. It's not my term, but I think it
Yes.
applies perfectly to
Absolutely.
how
Yeah.
to how we
Jordan
do.
Hall used to write these amazing pieces called situational awareness. Yeah.
Mhm. So we're not just, bringing someone, you in that case, that's going to give a lecture in some backdrop. My job actually as a host and co-organizer of this is to connect it to not just the past, which I've come to know very, very closely and very dearly. So all the sides of historical significance. And actually my job is to connect every single day of the program is going to have a different topic. So I'm going to take you through different spots in the area, and I'm going to tell you, okay, so today, for example, we're going to talk about the history of peer-to-peer. This is a site. This is what happened on this site. This is what people did, and then you're going to talk about, the theory, and people are going to see like how does that theory apply to this place? What happened here, which I will introduce tells connects to the bigger story that you're going to tell. We're also going to have breaks, obviously, because it's going to be quite intense. So we need a day of break. We're going to do tours, and then actually the last part. So this is going to take a week. Then the last part, which we're going to cover in the next part of the conversation, is the transition to the new technology. So after you finish the first week and you give us the background of the peer-to-peer and the commons and the civilizational transition and all of that, you already touched upon AI and how this leads to a new paradigm. This is what I've been working on for, I don't know, I guess the last couple of decades. And so I pick up from where you leave off, and then in the next week we're going to transition to the course that I'm organizing and hosting, which is called Pragmatic AI. So learning the first principles of how AI works, learning how you can use free and open source tools to actually do things, plus real world data. And it's a combination of lectures and hands-on labs. I've done it for the last 3 years by now. I've given it to individuals and organizations around the world. It keeps me on the edge, I have to say, because I first of all it's the field itself that keeps evolving, so you have to keep yourself up to date. And then just seeing like, okay, how does everything connect? Again, there's this backdrop of connection. How can I use all these different strands of AI? How can I use all these different data sets? How can I create scenarios that apply to people's day-to-day jobs and tasks and projects? How can I bring everything together and tell a story behind it and get people immersed into that story? Actually, it's like a full-time job. So I'm very glad that you'll be joining, and I hope that
Yeah, yeah,
at
yeah.
least
I
some
think
people
we'll
will
be a
join you.
dream team in terms of complementarity, and we know each other already, so we are very confident that this is going to work out the way we intend to.
Thanks for sticking around. For more stories like this, check the link in bio and follow Link Data Orchestration.